Well, we're continuing with the end time themes today, and on some level, we're going to skip the battle of Armageddon. All right, some of you may have been looking forward to that. Maybe you have the movie Armageddon in your mind as you think about it. I personally have never seen that, but everybody has a concept of end of the world times. But Armageddon, what we would typically articulate, happens in Revelation chapter 19, where we have the beast of the sea, which is the Antichrist, and the beast of the earth, which is the false prophet. They raise up an army, and then we have the armies of heaven, and the rider on the white horse, which is Jesus, comes and takes care of business, and all the soldiers of the enemy are destroyed by the false prophet, and the beasts of the sea are thrown into the fiery lake of burning sulfur. So that's the battle of Armageddon. But then we get to chapter 20, and we see now we got to deal with Satan specifically. So we dealt with Satan's lackeys, I guess, the beast of the sea and the beast of the earth. And now we're going to deal with Satan. And we get to this concept of the kingdom, of what does the kingdom look like. And you've heard me talk many times, I'm sure, about the kingdom of heaven. Now, the kingdom of heaven is a real tricky subject to talk about sometimes, because many of the ways when Jesus discusses it, he discusses it in the midst of a parable. The kingdom of heaven is like. And when you have a parable, there's room for interpretation of it could be this, it could be that. And even the parables that Jesus gives, as perfect as they are, can be misconstrued. There's limitations when you use analogies and parables. And so when we talk about the kingdom of heaven, what the kingdom is going to look like, what the end is going to look like, there's speculation. But Revelation chapter 20, the first 10 verses, talks about this concept of 1,000 years, or the millennium, as people probably more commonly understand it. But what is that millennium? What is the 1,000 years that we're talking about in Revelation chapter 20? Now, as I was doing research on this, one of the interesting things that I found is that this millennium hasn't throughout history hasn't really been used for political manipulation in certain ways. You would think a lot of people would see the millennium and they would claim divine inspiration, divine command, and they would establish their own political agenda, their own government, their own rule. But that really hasn't happened. Because instead of viewing it in that way, there's more what's called a realized eschatology. Eschatology is the study of the end, and realized meaning that it's here now. That it's not something we just wait for or we can manipulate. It's here now. We might not be sure what it is. We might have limitations on how we can articulate it. We may be limited on how we can experience the kingdom, but there's some level that because of Jesus, it's here now. But we come to Revelation chapter 20, and we start in verse 1. And John is writing, and he says, "Then I saw an angel come down from heaven with the key to the abyss and a heavy chain in his hand. He seized the dragon, that old serpent who is the devil, Satan, and bound him in chains for 1,000 years. The angel threw him into the abyss, which he then shut and locked, so Satan could no longer deceive the nations anymore until the 1,000 years were finished. Afterwards, Satan must be released for a little while." It's hard to kind of imagine, have a picture in my mind of what's happening here, particularly because we get the concept of abyss or the bottomless pit. And what is that? I mean, there are many interpretations of what that may mean. It kind of gets to the level of it's this vast subterranean cavern below the surface of the earth. Now, if we dig in the earth, I don't think we're actually going to find the abyss. We're not going to have a journey to the center of the earth moment where we can find it. That's not what this is going to look like. But it's below the earth, maybe not literally, but figuratively, from a spiritual realm standpoint. And there are concepts where we're saying the abyss could be the place where the dead dwell, or the place where sinners go waiting for judgment. We can conclude it's not a very inviting place. It's not a place that you're going to set up a picnic and have a good time. In Luke chapter 8, Jesus encounters a man who has several demons inside of him. And this is the chapter or story where Jesus casts out the demons, and they go into the herd of pigs, the 2,000 pigs, and then the pigs, the demons drown the pigs, and the people of the town say, "Hey, Jesus, go away. You're bothersome." But in this moment, Jesus encounters this man who has demons inside of him, and the demons ask Jesus not to send them to the abyss, to the bottomless pit. Demons are not comfortable there. That's not a place they want to go. So when we talk about the abyss, this is a pretty bad place. This is not a place that even demons want to go. I have no desire to go there either. If demons don't want to go there, how much more would I be against it? But the angel arrests Satan, arrests the devil. And I think this is just an interesting moment. In the fact of, we talk about how Satan has power. Satan has influence. Satan has authority. Right? Satan is not just some scrub. He has actual power and authority. But the angel comes and is able to bind Satan, is able to overpower him. And when I think about this, the ease in which the angel is able to overpower Satan, it gives me so much more confidence and how much easier is Jesus able to overpower Satan if an angel can do it? Right? So Satan has power. I'm not trying to devalue that at all. But the power that Satan has doesn't compare at all to the power that God has. So we have to make sure we keep these things in tension of, well, there is power, but man, we serve a God who's infinitely even more powerful than that. But this moment of what's happening is we see that Satan is thrown into the abyss and the doors are shut and locked. There's some Jewish heritage that is arising here. The Jews believed that when God would bring salvation, it was going to be a very public event. And this makes sense because the Jews viewed the Messiah as the one who was going to come and restore God's people to prominence and bring them to glory and have political power and all those types of things. So yeah, salvation, it makes sense that it would be public. People would see it. And on some levels, Christians have the same concept. You know, when Jesus returns, no one's going to miss it. We're not going to have a question, was that Jesus or not? It's going to be clear that Jesus is here. But as followers of Jesus, we also have a spiritual side of salvation. The inner transformation, things that we may not actually see on the physical side of things, but that God is still doing. That salvation is both the physical and the spiritual. But when we think of the angel, when we think of Satan being bound, I'm reminded time and time again when I read the book of Revelation that Christ wins without contest. There's no contest there. Jesus wins. There's no question. There's no uncertainty. Jesus wins. And in this, we see that Satan is unable to deceive for 1,000 years. If you've read the book of Revelation up to this point, you will have noticed that there are a lot of distressing things being talked about. A lot of trials, a lot of tribulations, a lot of battles, a lot of bad things that are happening. And we're finally beginning to see the tides shift. At the end of 19, we see that the battle of Armageddon has been won, and now Satan is bound. We see things are moving in a much more desirable place. Satan was bound for 1,000 years. And at this point, we could ask, well, what is 1,000 years? Is it a literal 1,000 years where the earth revolves around the sun 1,000 times? Is that when we get kind of to that point, we're getting so far into the minutia that we might not be able to climb out if we get that far. But we see that good things are starting to happen, that progress is going, that God's redemption is coming. It's not yet complete. There's still more work to be done, but God's redemption is coming. And so we continue in verse 4. John says, "Then I saw the thrones, and the people sitting on them had been given authority to judge. And I saw the souls of those who had been beheaded for their testimony about Jesus and for proclaiming the word of God. They had not worshipped the beast or his statue, nor accepted his mark on their foreheads or their hands. They all came to life again, and they reigned with Christ for 1,000 years. This is the first resurrection. The rest of the dead did not come back to life until the 1,000 years had ended. Blessed and holy are those who share the first resurrection. For them, the second death holds no power, but they will be priests of God and Christ and will reign with him 1,000 years. So martyrs tend to have a special place of recognition, a special place of authority. Now, the word martyr in the Greek, originally in the New Testament, meant mainly just a witness. Just somebody who proclaimed Jesus, who believed in Jesus, and never renounced him. The word began to shift a little bit for our English understanding of it when a lot of those witnesses began to die for their faith. And so for us, a martyr is someone who has been killed because they believe in whatever religious institution that they believe in. So there's a kind of a both and of, it's not necessarily just those who have died, but also those who would be classified as confessors. A confessor is someone who was persecuted for Jesus, was harmed, but wasn't actually killed. And so we see both of those are represented here, but those who actually died were given a special place of honor. Now, when we get into Revelation, we have to remember what the book of Revelation is about. It's not about, hey, here's a roadmap of exactly how you can predict what the future is going to be like. It's about confronting the powers of this world and how Jesus is going to win. The book of Revelation is not about the anti-Christ, it's about the living Christ and about how he is going to win in the end and how he's already won and how we see that playing out through history. So we have to be careful when we look at Revelation and prophecy and say, well, this is exactly how it's going to play out. And so we know emphatically, without question, these are the logistical steps that are going to happen. It may happen that way. I'm not saying it is, I'm not saying it's not, but we have to be careful when we get into our mind, well, this is how God is going to work things out, because we can't put God in a box. Prophecies in the Old Testament were continuing to be modified in how they were understood when God would do the work as described in the prophecies. So be careful not to say this is exactly how it's going to do, because we get to this concept of multiple resurrections. And things start to get real fuzzy when we start talking about how many resurrections are there. Are there one? Are there two? You could come up with at least three if you look at various texts. And so that gets a little difficult to comprehend. And one of the places that we try to get multiple resurrections is from 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. It says, the dead in Christ will rise first, and then we who are left will be caught up together and meet the Lord in the air. And what we have to recognize is what the Apostle Paul is actually doing in 1 Thessalonians. Because he's writing to people who understand the imperial system of Rome at the time. Because when a high-ranking official would visit a city, what would happen is that the citizens of that city would go out to meet the official and usher that person into the city. And so what Paul is saying is that when Jesus returns, his followers are going to usher him back to this world. So Paul's not necessarily talking about multiple resurrections or even the rapture concept. He's talking about ushering Jesus into this world, which is what our calling is. And we have 1 Corinthians 15, where the Apostle Paul is also writing, and he's talking about the resurrection. He's not talking about escaping. He's not talking about getting out of here. He's talking about being restored and redeemed. And those are some of the concepts we have to make sure we keep in the forefront of what we are talking about when we consider the end times, the millennial kingdom, of what Jesus is calling us to. Because when we start focusing on the speculation, we miss the calling that Jesus has given us right here, right now. Because this concept of the millennium and Revelation chapter 20, verses 1 through 10 is the only place this 1,000-year reign is discussed. So let's not make the whole Bible about these 10 verses. These 10 verses are important because they're in the Bible. I'm not trying to devalue that, but make sure we are careful. Because there are different theories about what this 1,000-year reign is going to look like. And there are three primarily ones. The first one is called post-millennialism. And the post means that Jesus is going to return after the 1,000-year reign. And this was a popular concept around the turn of the 20th century. And it's very optimistic concept, because what it believes is that Because of the transforming work of Jesus Christ that he has given to the church and how the church can go and impact the world for Jesus, the world is getting better. We're seeing lives change, lives transformed. The world is getting better and better, and the holiness movement is taking over, and people are coming to know Jesus and say, Jesus, the kingdom is just going to naturally happen because the world is getting better. Not as though sin will ever be completely eradicated, but it will be minimized. But as I said, this was prominent at the turn of the 20th century. Then World War I happened. Then the Great Depression happened. Then World War II happened. And people are like, hold on, the world's not getting better. We see all the evils that are going on. And so it was a difficult concept to grapple with. But probably the most prominent understanding, prominent thought people have is called premillennialism. Pre means that Jesus will return before the 1,000-year reign. And this is Jesus will return and have the 1,000-year reign. It's pretty self-explanatory. There are a lot of details to be worked out, a lot of speculation of how those details will actually come to fruition. But it says that the world is not getting any better. We're waiting for Jesus to come and restore it. And while it's more pessimistic than postmillennialism, it's not necessarily a cynical concept. Just because the world's not getting any better doesn't mean that we don't see change for Jesus happening. A third theory is that of called amillennialism. So it's the letter A in front of millennialism. And this is essentially saying that the kingdoms of evil, kingdom of this world, and the kingdom of heaven are functioning side by side. Not as though the kingdom of evil is influencing the kingdom of heaven, but both exist in this world, and people can choose where they reside, whether they reside in the kingdom of evil or the kingdom of heaven, and God's rule and God's reign. And so we see that both the goodness of Jesus and the evil of this world continue to grow at the same time. So we see transforming work, but we also see evil in this world as well, and we see both going and going and going. And so the millennium reign, the 1,000-year reign, is more of a figurative concept than an actual 1,000-year reign. And so both postmillennial and amillennialism both feel that the 1,000 years is not a literal 1,000-year reign, and that we move into that through the work of Jesus, while premillennialism focuses on the literal 1,000 years that Jesus will come and reign. Now there's another concept of premillennialism called dispensational premillennialism that I talked about. It's about the Left Behind series, talked about on January 16th. I'm not going to bore you with that again. But if you're interested, I would challenge you to go. You can look it up on YouTube or Facebook or a podcast, and you can catch that again. For the reality is, Jesus has called us to an important mission now. And premillennial dispensationalism basically says what you do doesn't matter. That we're just waiting to escape, and that's it. But that's not what Jesus talks about. That's not what Revelation talks about. And so we have to be careful about these. But those are the three main theories: the amillennialism, postmillennialism, and premillennialism. Right? Yeah. So anyway, so those are the three main theories about what happens. And we have to be careful when we start getting into these theories, that we don't get lost in them so much that we miss the calling that Jesus has for us. Because you can be post, pre, all, whatever, and you can still follow Jesus. And I'm not trying to be wishy-washy and not offend people. I'm saying there's no definitive understanding of what is or what isn't happening. But I do believe that Jesus has given us a purpose, a calling. And we as his people, as the community of believers, as the church, have a calling right now. And part of that calling is to work for the justice of Jesus and the good in this world. Not as though we can fix the world. We recognize it's God's power working in us that impacts any change we can have. But the world is broken. And so we are called to be agents of light. Say, this is what Jesus has for you. Jesus has something better than what this world offers. And so that's what we are called to do in this period. Wherever we fall in this 1,000-year reign, we're called to do that. Now, on some level, I recognize that the church's mission, the church's ability, is similar to a Band-Aid. We're just going to help stop the bleeding. Now, Jesus can transform. He can do more than just put a Band-Aid on it now. But we're still waiting for the fullness of his redemption to come. So we're pointing to the redemptive possibilities of Jesus. So regardless of how we see the end working out, our mission is to show the world the redemptive possibilities that Jesus has for us now. That how we can live now. Often I fear the church does a poor job of doing that. We spend so much time not living in that reality that is detrimental to our witness. We spend so much time bickering, so much time anger, so much time gossiping, so much time being frustrated with other people that we miss these opportunities to create this community that Jesus calls us to make. So we look at the Revelation, we look at other scriptures, and you can come up with 1, 2, 3 different resurrections. Most scholars point to, there's going to be a single resurrection. We don't know for sure. If we put God in a box, then we're kind of being a little high and mighty on our own conclusions, our own thinking, that we know what God's going to do. But the one thing we do know is that Christ wins without contest. He wins. And we have this in the concluding part of this section, in verse 7. It says, when the 1,000 years had come to an end, Satan will be let out of his prison. He will go out to deceive the nations, called Gog and Magog, in every corner of the earth. He will gather them together for battle, a mighty army as numerous as the sand on the seashore. And I saw them as I went upon the broad plain of the earth and surrounded God's people and the beloved city. But fire from heaven came down on the attacking armies and consumed them. Then the devil, who had deceived them, was thrown into the fiery lake of burning sulfur, joining the beast and the false prophet. There they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So this is the last hurrah for Satan. And Satan is released. And that's important for us to recognize. He did not escape. He did not overpower his guards. He didn't pick the lock. He was released. He was given permission to go. The question of why can be a difficult one to understand, but we see he goes on a kind of a last tour of deception. Now again, the last battle, Armageddon, happened at the end of Revelation 19. But we have this concept of Gog and Magog that are mentioned here. And in the Old Testament times, this would have referred to as areas of Russia. And pretty clearly it was indicating Russia. And today we have to be careful because Gog and Magog aren't necessarily Russia today. There's a lot of different people. And so when we look at the news and see what Russia is doing or isn't doing, sometimes we can panic. But you remember Matthew chapter 24, where Jesus is answering the question that his disciples asked. They asked, what will be the signs of your return? And Jesus says, there'll be wars and rumors of wars and famines and earthquakes and apostasy and persecution. He says, but don't panic. So maybe what Russia is doing at some point is ushering in these last days. I don't know. I'm not trying to make that claim today, but I am making the claim of what Jesus says in Matthew 24. Don't panic. Don't get too stressed out about it because Christ wins without contest. That's the key truth there. It's not how these things are going to happen. It's what does it matter for me as a follower of Jesus. So these events in this world may be important for us to understand. May be important for us to keep our understanding of what's going on. But Jesus says, don't panic. So why is Satan given this opportunity for a last deception tour? I mean, some say it's to demonstrate how even in ideal circumstances, people are inclined to sin, that people will reject God. They will rebel against him, even if they were given every opportunity not to. But we do find that this battle is pretty anti-climatic. Satan gathers these people, whoever they may be, and they surround God's people, and then fire comes down from heaven. That was it. That was the battle. The battle's over at that point. There is no other details that are given. Now, the Bible was not written to give you a schematic of the military conquest, of how this battle actually happened. The point that it's trying to convey is that Christ wins, and that's it. That the enemies of Christ are defeated, and there's nothing they can do about it. And we find in this moment particularly, as I think about what Jesus is doing, is that evil must not be tolerated. Until we destroy and eradicate it, it will keep crawling back into our lives. You can think of the sin that you've experienced in your life, whether past or present. Until you eradicate it, it's going to keep bothering you. It's not going to go away. You can't ignore sin out of your life. You have to treat it with hostility. You have to treat it with aggression and say, I don't want you anymore. Go away. And then Jesus can purify it. So Jesus is treating evil with hostility. He's eradicating it. In this moment, we see the fire coming down from heaven so that evil is consumed and destroyed, and then God's people are safe. And the devil is thrown into the fiery lake of burning sulfur. He joins the beast of the sea, which is the Antichrist, and the beast of the earth, which is the false prophet. They're already there, keeping a spot warm for him, as we find in Revelation 19. And so Satan joins them now. And they will endure suffering day and night forever and ever. It does pose the interesting concept, how can a loving God bring pain and suffering for all of eternity? We're going to talk about judgment next week, so we'll broach that topic more. But I didn't want to just brush over it today without sharing that. But one of the things I'm reminded of is that we have to be real careful of not saying, well, how can God do this? We have to be careful of making judgments ourselves when we don't know the full story. You've had experiences where you've made premature judgments, but then when you got a bigger picture of the story, you either understood why that happened or understood why it didn't happen, and maybe you changed your mind. So I don't want to say I understand exactly why God does this. He's a loving God, but He's also a just God. And I can say that today, but I also recognize my limitations to fully understand God and fully understand the situation that the world is in. But there's no drama. There's no drama at the end. There's no drama at the final battles because Christ wins without contest. I'm not sure how it's all going to work out. Not sure of all the details, which comes to probably the most cheesy theory on the millennium. We have premillennium, post, and awe, and then there's the pan-millennialist. Everything's going to pan out in the end, right? And on some levels, it may be cheesy, but that's what we believe. I may not know all the details. I may not know how it all works out, but I know Christ is going to emerge victorious from this. And if I am faithful to Christ, then I am on the winning side. I'm going to enjoy in the victory that Christ has won. But just because it's all going to work out in the end, just because Christ is going to win completely in the end, doesn't mean we're just sitting here twiddling our thumbs waiting for it. Christ has given us a mission now. He's given us the responsibility now. We can sit here and talk about all these theories, all these ideas about how the end times are going to be, and that can be great, but if it stops there, it's unproductive. If it stops there, it had no change in this world. The world is hurting. The world, on some levels, feels like it's in its own Armageddon itself. That it's in the end times, there are terrible things happen all throughout the world. And the world is hurting. And so what Jesus does is He calls the church to say, there's hope. Live in this hope. Share this hope with others. Because no matter how we're hurting, whether we're living in a literal war zone or our life feels in shambles because we can't control what's happening, there's hope in Jesus. No matter where we are, we have hope. And one of the things this should do is I hope this should give us empathy for others. Give us empathy for the world. Because the world is hurting. And Jesus has pulled us from that hurt and said, there's better for you. And we can help them, those who don't know Jesus, experience this hope. So regardless of how the kingdom of heaven will come to fruition, regardless of how the 1,000-year reign will or will not be, we are called to usher in the kingdom of heaven now. We are called to live in the kingdom of heaven now, not the kingdom of this world. We can live in the reality and the reign of Jesus Christ now. You don't have to wait. Isn't that great? In our world of instant gratification, Jesus says you don't have to wait to experience redemption. You can experience it now. Now we have to be careful. You have to come with humility. There's no arrogance or entitlement. But I do think we have to come to grips with reality and stop living in sin. We have to get rid of the sin that's in our lives. Because until we do, I fear we're not on the right side. Until we do, then the end times are something to be feared, not something to anticipate. So as I said, the church is to be show the world the redemptive possibilities of Jesus now. But yet we have things like gossip. We have things like lying. We have things like anger and resentment and grudges and indifference and apathy. And when we allow those things to reign in our lives now, then the victorious Christ is going to have some words with us at best. And I'm telling you what, I don't know the formula for what it's going to take for Jesus to say, well done, good and faithful servant. But I do know if we don't deal with sin now, Jesus is going to deal with it later. If we don't deal with sin, if we don't eradicate it, if we don't treat it with hostility, if we don't say, get away from me now, Jesus will have to do it. Jesus is willing to help you with that now. This is not a try harder. It's Jesus inviting you to live in this reality. Because what I say to you is, I don't know where you are today. I don't know what you are experiencing. I don't know what you are going through. I don't know what's on your mind. You may be hurting. You may be scared. You may be frustrated. But what I do know is that Jesus meets you where you are and he says, I've got something better for you. See, Jesus didn't come to condemn. He came to save the world. And when Jesus returns, he says, you better be ready before I return. And he says, I'm going to help you get ready. Christ wins without contest. And I promise you that no matter what you're going through, Christ can win now. You don't have to wait for it. Now, you may not get the fullness and the fruition of it, but Christ can give you victory. I hope you've experienced that. I hope you are living in that reality. Because no matter where you are, maybe you're in a good place right now. But even if you're not, Jesus has more for you. He has more love, more grace, more transforming work for you. So we usher in the kingdom, knowing it's coming. Don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but we know that Christ wins, and he invites us to share in that victory now. I hope you don't wait. Let's pray.